Joining us right now on Can iMedia is Dylan Jones with the Canada West Foundation. Dylan, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Perhaps you can tell people a little bit about what Canada West Foundation does.
Sure. We're committed to the prosperity of Western Canada. So we really look at those issues that are long-term strategic issues that are going to affect the future of the region. So we're a think tank, and we like to do big strategic research, and we like to encourage and sometimes challenge industry and government to do the things that are going to be needed for the long term for this region.
Before we get into that a little bit, you hear the term think tank a lot.
Yes.
So I get a picture in my head. Tell me what exactly a think tank is.
Well, it's exactly what you think. It's a group of people who get together and gather the evidence on key problems or challenges and analyze them and come up with advice.
Okay.
Right? Which we offer and sometimes inflict on others.
Okay.
So, yes.
Well, you have no power to get them to do what you want them to do you?
No.
You're just offering the advice and hopefully that they pick it up.
But you know, a lot of the issues that are dealt with are dealt with a very short-term view, and there's an absolute hunger by the in the public for facts and evidence and credible research. And of course, the absolute critical factor for any think tank like ours is that we are doing good evidence-based research, and people can rely on what we're doing.
Okay.
We're independent.
Right.
We're not owned by government or industry or anyone. Right. We do public interest research, and there's a thirst for it. And sometimes, you know, it's amazing how facts can influence governments and influence industry.
Oh yeah, you'd like to think that.
Yes.
So tell me, one of the latest projects you've been working on is pipelines.
Yes.
Okay, Keystone XL, I imagine Northern Gateway as well.
That's right.
When you look at something like this, what is your position on it? Where have you come out on it?
So the work we've done thus far is really to try to get an understanding of the scale of the problem. How important is it? Who does it affect? It doesn't really matter, right? Because of course, there's a lot of concern about the environmental dimensions of pipelines. So we were trying to get at, you know, do we need them? And what we've discovered, of course, is that the pipeline issue is probably the biggest economic issue confronting, you know, Canada today. We're looking at, it's a loss if we don't build these pipelines. It's $1.3 trillion. It's twice, you know, the entire federal spend on healthcare, right? It's the equivalent of employing 7.6 million Canadians, right? It's just, when you look at all the benefits, and what we discovered in our research was just how much the benefits from pipelines flow out into other parts of the country, other parts of the economy. So for those Canadians who would really like to see a move away from oil, what we've learned is it would be a very big and challenging journey, right? And then the other dimension of it is, would shutting down the Canadian oil industry actually help the environment, right? And our preliminary look, I mean, we're still digging into this, but is not really, because there is lots of demand for oil in China and India, and there's people who will supply them, right? So, you know, our concern really at this stage is that we abandon a powerful economic driver in the Western Canadian economy, and as a consequence, we move the jobs and the emissions into countries that we don't control, that have potentially lower standards, and we still have the GHG emissions, right? So
we have to import oil,
that's right? Yeah, I mean, we have pipelines now that are adequate to supply our domestic needs, so I don't really see a situation. I mean, no one in British Columbia is suggesting shutting down the pipelines that provide them with their oil. Right. The objection in British Columbia is with building more pipelines to allow exports, to meet the fuel needs of other people.
Which would be okay if we could make some money out of it. Is sort of how they're looking at it, right? I mean, BC wants their premier, but
I think there are people who are opposed to the pipelines because they're opposed to oil. And there's people for whom it's really just a matter of whether BC is getting a big enough benefit because there's some environmental risk.
Well, let's talk about environmental risk and when it comes to sustainability. When you looked at the pipelines, because this is their concern, is that what if there's a spill and there's a horrible catastrophe? But when you look at the pipeline industry, there aren't that many mistakes, are there? And certainly not huge ones.
So I would divide this issue into two categories. The one is the marine spill and the other is the land spill. I think they're quite different. With the pipeline spill, pipes spill. There are spills. Now they're not large typically, but there are spills. And I don't think early in the discussion in BC there was enough clarity around that, right? Because people need to understand that there will be spills, just like there's small gas spills in boating, right? For pleasure boating. I mean, there's small spills associated with pipelines. I don't think there was enough clarity around the size of those spills and what the response was, right? But the issue with pipelines is that there are spills. It'd be great to get them to zero, right? But the practice so far hasn't been zero.
Right.
There are spills, and then clarity about what happens when there is a spill. Okay, now bear in mind, and people don't get this, it's so true, the oil sands is a massive natural oil spill. That's what it is. It is a huge...
Well, I see how you're making that comparison.
But it is a huge, it is a bunch of oil that's sitting in sand. Right. Fairly close to the surface. That's already leaching into the water. Right? So, I mean, it's a really interesting point.
Okay.
In some ways, I mean, people would not buy this, but there's an element, what we're doing in the oil sands, or what industry is doing, it has a lot of the aspects of cleanup. Has a lot of the characteristics
because
of...
you're taking it out and moving it out of the region.
Basically filtering it out of the sand. Right? And gathering it up. On the marine side, I see the marine side is so tricky because, you know, I grew up on the coast. The problem with the marine side is you really can't allow any spill, any major spill. Right? I mean, no spill is acceptable. So with pipelines, you can have a small spill, and frankly, you can clean it up, and there really is no enduring damage. But the issue with the marine spill is there's been a profound change in tanker technology. Right? Tankers used to be single hull, they're now double hull, dot. Right? There's been a profound change on the theory that no spill is acceptable. The question is how you build comfort in the public that there won't be a spill, because the standard for marine has to be no spill. Right? I mean, there could be a drop of oil at the point of where the oil is being loaded into a tanker, for example. But when that tanker's out on the ocean, the standard has to be no spill, and there has to be real comfort that there will be no spill. It's very hard to provide that assurance. Right? Even though there's been, you know, a huge amount of change in the technology. Right? But that's the issue.
But it's just once there's a major issue, it's a catastrophe.
No significant oil spill off the coast of British Columbia is acceptable. Can be acceptable. Right? And there's frankly no money to fully compensate for that.
When you look at something like this, especially when we're looking in Alberta as well, or the Arctic where they're looking at doing more work, is that one of the main issues that you look at, is the environment and protecting it?
Well, absolutely. Right? So, I mean, I have a real concern with moving all these industries to other countries where we can't control. Like, you know, for me, leadership is being a Western Canada is a tremendous resource provider. We're a powerhouse in food, energy, and materials. Well, there's anything to be ashamed of with being global leaders in the resource business. But you can't do that if you don't have world-leading environmental technology. Right? I mean, that, you know, you really have to be a global leader. So I don't think the answer is to move all these industries to other countries. The answer is to be a global leader. The question is how you do that, right? And the environment is fundamentally important, but there's other things that are important. I think it's really important that there be local economic development for communities where there's these activities. And you know, there have been some projects in the resource sector that have just done profound things for the economic development of our northern communities and our First Nations communities. I mean, it's not just environment. There's all sorts of other benefits. Right? It also derives an innovation in economy because resources is very, very innovation driven. Right? And you know, that's your engineering jobs in the cities and all of that. So the environment isn't the only issue, but it's a really, really important one.
Well, and you've got to think worker safety has to come into this as well, especially when you're looking at the Arctic. You're talking about the elements that they've got to contend with, the 24 hours of darkness and all that. Is that an element of your study as well, is looking into that area?
So we haven't looked, and I just want to be clear with this, we've looked at the, what you might call the Southern experience. We haven't done a separate paper on the Arctic experience. It'd be great to do one. Obviously, there are some very, very unique issues in the Arctic. There's also a fundamental difference, which is so much activity being offshore, right? So in that sense, the learnings are learnings from Europe, learnings from the east coast of Canada, right? That we don't have a lot of offshore experience, you know, in the Alberta, Saskatchewan oil and gas industries. So it's that's a whole other territory.
Do you see the industry moving in a positive direction when it comes to environmental safety, worker safety, those sorts of things?
So I still think there's more room to go, and you know, I think we've seen one of the challenges with the oil and gas business is the companies Canada's already high cost. We're already a high cost producer compared to Venezuela, Mexico, etc. And the companies are under a lot of pressure, right, to keep costs down, right? And I think the companies are in different places in terms of, all of them are good by any international standard. For Canadian resource businesses are at a very high standard, but we need to be certain that every single company that's doing business in the resource sector is at the top possible standard. And can I say with complete confidence that that's true? No, I think there's some variation between the companies, and I think we have the whole industry to account in terms of truly being, not just saying, being a global leader when it comes to safety and the environment. Right?
Wonderful.
On the safety side, I think it's very, very good. Right? On the environment side, we're good, but we need to be the best.
Dylan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We've been chatting with Dylan Jones with the Canada West Foundation.